Hello, folks. This is Bela. Our regular listeners and viewers will know that we've been doing an extended series of episodes that chronicle the trip that Mike Malekoff and I made in moving his boat from Brunswick, Georgia, to Burlington, Vermont. And this was took us almost 30 days to do that. And we made almost one episode every day. Actually made a total of 23 recordings that I have been slowly processing and editing and putting up and posting to our channel. And I've been doing about one a week. Well, 23 episodes doing one a week, that's like 23 weeks. It's like half a year. And in the meantime, there's been a couple of other interviews that we've done with some guests. And so what we decided to do was keep doing the Brunswick, Georgia to Burlington, Vermont trip, releasing those episodes one a week. But when I get a new episode with a new guest that I'm recording in the meantime, I'm going to interlace those or introduce them also on an alternate day, but sort of in between the Mike Malekoff episodes. So some weeks you're going to end up seeing two episodes come out. And hopefully once we get through all of the Brunswick, Georgia to Burlington, Vermont episodes, we will get then back to our regular format of episodes where Mike Wasserman and I interview people, we make some commentary, and that's sort of our regular format. But I was fortunate enough to go on this trip with Mike Malekoff, and I thought it'd be important to chronicle those into some pretty good episodes. So hope this is one of those interlaced episodes with a quote-unquote regular guest. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Today's guest on the podcast is Mark Dalton. And we have an interesting story about Mark. And I think the interesting part starts with how he met Mike, because Mike does the interview. So this is a big change. Mike's going to interview Mark, but also let's dive in a little bit to how you met Mark and his story.
Sure. Bela and listeners, and I'm not the sailing expert, so this is not going to be, the most insightful, cutting edge technological interview you've ever heard. But this was one of these things that I met Mark. I happened to be in Dublin a few weeks ago, and which is not that far. It's like, a 2-hour flight from where I live in Germany. I have a friend that lives there, and this friend of mine in Dublin is a friend of Mark's. So we all went to an Irish pub in Dublin to get together. There was, I think, 5 or 6 of us. And we started talking about things that we do, and somebody was talking about podcasting. And then I happened to say, well, I'm a podcast host, right? And everybody laughed when I told them the storyline, right? That my friend Bela and I have been doing this for several years, and I don't know anything about sailing. And then Mark jumped in and was like, well, let me tell you about some of my sailing adventures. And he's showing me his boats, and we're having 1 pint, turns into 2 pints, turns into 3 pints, and everybody's laughing hysterically. And I said, Mark, please, you got to be on the podcast, right? And he said, sure, would love to, and sent me some information. And we kind of got the plan was that, Bela would do the interview like we always do. But Bela's like, Mike, I'm on the boat, and you'll see as we start, right? You are on the boat on the trip. So I did the interview. But we had a great time, and we talked so much that we broke this into 2 episodes. So maybe without further ado, Bela, let's jump right into my interview with Mark Dalton.
That sounds good. Let's go.
Okay, listeners, this is Mike. Not the normal routine here, but we've got an exciting guest today. I'm really happy to welcome Mark Dalton from Dublin, Ireland. So we're going a little bit east of our normal range today, but I think this will be a really interesting interview. And Bela, speaking of east and on the water, Bela is joining us on the water from a boat. So this is going to be an interesting mix, something we don't normally do on the podcast, but we're going to give it a shot. So maybe Bela, you want to start with a short update of where you're at right now and what you're doing, and then we'll bring in Mark.
Sure. So I've been helping a friend of mine Mike Malekoff, who's actually been on the podcast numerous times, move his boat from Brunswick, Georgia, up to Burlington, Vermont. And right now we are between the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware Bay out in the Atlantic Ocean, about 5 miles offshore. And there is not a puff of wind out here. And it's about as calm a sea as I have ever seen. So we're headed north. This should take us about a total of 26 hours to get to Cape May. So tomorrow morning sometime, we'll pull into Cape May. If the weather's good, we'll keep going. And if the weather's not good, we'll pull into Cape May, spend the day there. If it's good, we'll keep going either to Atlantic City or to Sandy Hook, one of those two. So that's it for me.
Sounds wonderful. And then from that same body of water, but a long way away on the other side of the ocean, Mark Dalton is joining us from Dublin. And Mark and I had the good fortune to meet through a mutual friend in a pub in Dublin over a few pints of Guinness, and really hit it off. And he was telling me some stories about sailing, and I'm like, I have an idea. I have a friend that sails, and I happen to know about a podcast, and maybe you'd like to join. And Mark graciously agreed. So it's 9 p.m. here, my time. It's 8 p.m. in Dublin, and so Bela, for you, it's about 2 in the afternoon. No, if it's 9 p.m. here, yeah, it's 3. It's 3 in the afternoon there on the east coast of the U.S.
Yep. And we are using Starlink here to make this connection.
Okay, via the satellite. So Mark, the floor is kind of yours. Maybe just start by telling the listeners a bit about yourself and, maybe how we met and developed this idea for talking about this podcast episode today.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Actually, funny enough, Bela, I live in the Dublin Mountains, and the broadband here is hopeless. So I'm actually using Starlink as well, would you believe?
There you go.
So I work in University College Dublin. I am the university's designated vet. And the reason I mention that is our mutual friend, Mark Dalton, is a colleague of mine in there, as well as a fellow mountain biker. And that's how we met.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with sailing. It was
nothing
interesting.
At all. Yeah.
But after about the third pint, we started to talk about sailing, and you have some interesting stories. So maybe let's start in the beginning. Kind of, how did you get into sailing, Mark?
So I grew up in a little village outside Dublin called Killiney, which is near Dunleary, which at the time was one of the big ports adjacent to Dublin. And had then and still has a lot of recreational sailing there. My father lived for the sea. That was really his great passion. And he was a life member of a club there called the Royal Irish. And all the clubs here have junior sections. And so I went to the junior section from I was very, very young. And I would have been sailing with him before then, since I can't remember when, since I was very, very small.
Cool. And maybe we could take a sidetrack. I think we're going to have to break this into 2 episodes, Bela, but I think that's okay. Maybe let's take a little sidetrack, because I think the listeners, especially in the U.S., might be a little bit interested in maybe kind of the history that your dad had with sailing and with boating and with the United States. There's an interesting connection there.
Yeah. So what you're referring to is my Ireland, as most of your listeners may know, Ireland was neutral in the Second World War, but about 45,000 Irishmen and women, because my aunt went too, went to the UK and volunteered for the British forces. My father and his brother, my Uncle Rob, did also. And as a result of that, my father was a lieutenant in the Royal Navy and was second in command of a tank landing craft, landing tanks on Omaha Beach at D-Day, which, although he was in the British Navy, they were carrying American Sherman tanks. And in fact, I'm just thinking, I have downstairs an oil can dispenser thing that was given to my father by one of the tank guys just before they disembarked onto Omaha Beach. So yeah, so that was my father's history.
Neat. And I guess
he had a lot of greats. Well, I shouldn't say that, because he didn't talk about any of that. Like a lot of people who went through that, he didn't talk about any of that when I was growing up. I'm not sure when I became aware of any of that, but probably not until I was in my 30s, I think. He didn't talk about any of that until he was in his 70s, I would think. He never mentioned it.
Yeah, that's pretty common both with my relatives in the US and also the Germans that I know. It doesn't come up. I think you see some horrible things and you keep it to yourself. But I mean, and if it's okay with you, Mark, I'll share with the listeners in our show notes some of the stories about your dad that were written, his obituaries, because it tells the history and it's an amazing story. And he had an amazing life. Not just that, I enjoyed reading about him. It was really something.
He really did. He lived to be 95. He sailed and he cruised his whole life, always sailing north. And they sailed to the Lofoten Islands, they sailed to the Faroe Islands, went up to the Arctic Circle. And even when he was in his 60s and 70s, he had his own boat. And he and two old guys, whose combined age was well over 200. I think it was close on 250 before they finally sold the boat. They did a lot of cruising around Scotland. And then he actually, a couple of years before he died, he was awarded the Légion d'honneur by the French government for the D-Day landings. So he was a minor celebrity shortly before he died.
Which is cool and very much appreciated, it sounded like. And so I think it's safe to say, Mark, that you come by this whole sailing business honestly, right? You grew up in it, right?
I did, yeah. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe kind of start with the kind of boats you started sailing with. And I think, Bela and I have talked to a lot of American sailors and have heard a lot of American stories, and it'll be interesting to hear kind of from the Irish perspective, what learning to sail is like and what kind of boats you sail when you're younger. And then maybe a little bit, I know you've sailed a ton of boats and some really interesting ones, but maybe you can share a little bit of kind of your history with some of the different boats that you've sailed that I think our listeners would be interested in.
Okay, if I'm not told to be too granular, but so please move me on if you need to.
Don't worry, granular is good. I mean, I think our listeners appreciate this kind of detail.
Okay, so I started off when I was in the junior section. I would have been sailing a thing called a mirror dinghy, which a lot of people I think on this side of the world would know very, very well. Probably not so much in the States, because they were an interesting class of dinghy, because a paper in the UK called the Mirror, actually just had a competition for a boat for the common man, and this was the dinghy that won that competition, and they became kind of the gold standard. I think they still are, maybe not so much, but for a long time they were the gold standard for kids learning to sail. Small two-person dinghy, and I sailed one of them from I was a very small kid, and then I would have graduated to sailing a boat called a 420, so called because they were 4 meters 20 long. And then I think the slightly longer version of them, the 470, that was an Olympic class for a while, and they were a lot of fun to sail. They were particularly a lot of fun to crew because there was a trapeze on them.
Wow.
So I sailed one of them for a good while, and then I got a laser, which I think you guys would be familiar with the lasers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
we have 420s here.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a class, and the 470 and the lasers.
Yeah. So I would have sailed 420s and the laser. I would have raced all of them as well. At that time, I mean, there's laser 1s and laser 2s now. Back then, there was just lasers.
It reminds me, Mark, of we have a lot of youth programs here as well in this country. Most yacht clubs, or even cities and towns sponsor those kind of sailing things. And it's such a great way to get kids into sailing. but it's also, I think, one of the best ways to learn sailing, because you really understand on those small little dinghies how everything you do impacts what the boat does. You know, when you're on a big boat like this, I can move to one side of the boat or the other. It makes no difference. But in a dinghy, you have to be on the proper side of the boat. Otherwise, you're going for a swim.
Yeah. Yep. I've done that. Yeah. So, funny enough, I was just thinking when you mentioned about learning, the logical step after that, because you do 3 levels of badges to, you know, of competency badges for kids, or, you know, into sort of late teens. And I did all of those. And then what you could do was become an instructor. And then you got paid what at the time was great money for, you know, sitting in a rubber dinghy and bossing kids around and looking cool. And I wanted to do that. And I this sounds a bit arrogant, but it's not meant to. The only exam I ever failed in my life was the navigation portion of that exam. And the awful thing about that was, I didn't mention, but my father was, in cruising terms, was Ireland's, or certainly Dublin's anyway, top navigator at the time. Yeah. So I can't remember, but I doubt if that went down very well. And I never went back and did it again, so I never became an instructor.
Wow. So then you graduated a little bit, right, and moved up. And what was kind of the first boat you owned on your own?
Oh, sorry, I should have just said before we get to that. My father had a thing called a Glen at the time. Okay. They're an Irish class, and they were built. I think they were built in the north of Ireland. They were named after the Glens of Antrim. So they were about a 20 or so foot long wooden boat, and he used to race that, and I used crew for him. And my father was a great seaman and a shocking racer. And there was lots of shouting and lots of coming last and not doing so well. So sorry, Mike, your question was?
Well, and just kind of moving on, what was the first boat you really owned on your own, and kind of how did you progress through different sizes and styles of boats? You had some really interesting styles of boats that you were kind of sharing with me, and I think that kind of how you progressed through the world of sailboats might be really interesting. Yeah,
well, what actually happened was, and it's kind of, if you like, it's a good segue. I more or less gave up on sailing for a long time. And that was kind of my father's fault, because he was a great man and I loved him to bits, but he, if I'm allowed to say this, he was a complete prick on a boat.
I've experienced a few of those in my days when I used to do the Wednesday evening races around the cans, as they say here in the United States. And I always have said that, I sail to relieve tension, not cause it.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of captains that I crewed for in those races that were clearly caused a lot of tension on the boat.
Yeah. Well, that was my old fella, unfortunately. Yeah. So I would have crewed for him then, after I left college, and when I was working, when I was back down in Dublin, I would have crewed for him. And at that stage, he had a thing called a ruffian, which is that's the thing the boat I was talking about him owning with these 2 other fellows who were a similar vintage to himself. And they used to race it, and I used crew when I was in Dublin. And we were actually out racing one night. And am I allowed to swear?
No, it'd be better if you did.
Okay.
Because if you do, then I have to check a box when I upload it, and then certain countries will ban it. So
so he was roaring at me one night when I was pulling a jib sheet in as hard as I could, telling me to pull it in faster, and I couldn't. And I turned around and I told him to off. And I didn't sail again for about 20 years after that.
Oh,
I
wow.
think. Yeah. And I didn't fall out of them permanently, but I just didn't sail anymore. And then life sort of took me to places where, well, I actually was living then up in the north of Ireland near a lake, but there was no sailing on the lake and it was inland. So I took up water skiing instead. And then I moved to Australia and New Zealand or New Zealand and Australia in that order. And I wasn't actually living near the water a lot of the time. So I didn't sail then. And it was really only when I came back to Ireland that I took up sailing again.
Interesting. Which is too bad because there's some beautiful sailing in New Zealand. One of the, like, I can count them on two hands how many times I've sailed was in the Tasman Bay in New Zealand, and it was absolutely gorgeous. I almost destroyed the boat, but that's a different story. But yeah, that's interesting. Okay. So New Zealand, Australia, you come back to Ireland, and sailing, how does sailing re-enter your life?
Well, inland waterways, really, I have never been as hardcore a sailor as my father was, and I've never really wanted to be, but I always loved the water. So I would have cruised on boats on the River Shannon, which is the largest river in Ireland. And there are boats there called Shannon 1 designs, and I would have crewed. A friend of mine would have had a Shannon 1 design. They're a very old, large wooden dinghy that take a crew of 3, and I would have crewed on one of them a bit. They race them on the Shannon, still do. And so I would have got back into doing a bit of sailing then, crewing on they're called sods, because SOD, Shannon 1 design, crewing on a sod. And just a little bit in and out of sailing, but it certainly wasn't a priority, and it wasn't, what it has been in the last 10 to 15 years for me. It's only in the last 10 to 15 years that I've really come back to sailing and boating properly.
Yeah. And at least if I remember correctly, what you were telling me too, a lot of it was the social element, right? It was doing this with friends and people that you enjoyed spending time with, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I have always raced, and actually, normally in life, I'm a terribly competitive person, but actually sailing, not so much, because any of the racing I've done in the last 10 or plus years has been as a crew, and never that seriously either. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of suited me, that I was thinking, Bella, when you were saying that about the sailing to get rid of tension, and actually a friend of mine who also acts as a mechanic for one of my boats now, telling me a similar story about a boat that he still sails on, and some young fella arriving on the boat and creating mayhem, not as skipper, but creating mayhem and shouting at people, and the skipper having to take him on one side and tell him, we come here once a week to get out to sail and then go for a pile of pints, and that's why we're here. So and that's why I'd be there as well.
I love the priorities, and it really, it's really to have fun and to enjoy the company of others and to enjoy the ocean, which is so beautiful in your part of the world. It's neat. That really struck me as kind of your motivation for doing this. Was really to have fun with friends, which is neat.
Yeah. And to be outside.
Yeah, and to be outside in a beautiful place. I don't know. You want to get into a couple of the stories you were sharing about some of your sailing adventures? You have a pile of them, and I think we could go on for a long time. But maybe pick a couple and start. I think things that might be interesting and different for our listeners.
Well, do you want me to talk about the boat that I bought?
Oh, sure. We didn't even get to that part. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, I'm sorry. There were a good few pints had that night, Mike. I can't remember what stories I told you. or even,
Well,
let's
start with your current boat. I think
Yeah.
this will lead us into where a fruitful place.
So I have a couple of boats at the moment, and that's enough. That's more than enough for anyone. I think it's about 8 or 9 years ago now. Time flies. I bought a Dutch sailing barge, a beautiful old thing called a Tjalk, TJALK, and I again, going back to what I said, I'm a lot of the time I'm quite happy with the inland waterways because I like the intersection between land and water. That's what I really like, and therefore, if you're on a river or a lake or a canal, there's lots of that intersection. Being out in the middle of the ocean, I don't. It's fine, but I would much rather be at the intersection between land and water. So I had started looking for a barge of some sort, and I was actually over in London for work, and I presume you guys know or use Apollo Duck, do you?
No, I don't know what that is.
Maybe it's only a European thing. So Apollo Duck is certainly in Europe. If you want to buy a boat, you look on Apollo Duck. And if you want to buy anything, if you want to buy a little canoe to put in your kid's paddling pool, or you want to buy a nuclear submarine, you start on Apollo Duck. So I had been looking on Apollo Duck, and then coincidentally, sorry, I'm wandering a bit, but coincidentally, I was in London and I saw a barge for sale, and I thought, oh, I'll have a look at that. And when I went to look at it, there was no mast in it, but it had a mast stepping. And I said to the lady who was selling the boat, I said, do these have masts? I had never even heard of a sailing barge, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah. I haven't either. Yeah.
And so this was my first inkling, and she said, "Oh yeah," and I said, "Are there many of them in Holland?" And she said, "They're everywhere." So I immediately then, and I said, "So what's this actually called?" And she said, "It's called a Tjalk." And I said, "How do you spell that?" And she told me. And so I then went straight back to Apollo Duck, and I spent a very enjoyable 4 or 5 months, maybe more, going over to look at them. I got in touch with the brokers over there in Holland. And this broker would line me up with 5 boats. I'd fly over to Holland for the day, get onto Google Maps, drive around, look at the boats, and then come home. And eventually I ended up with the boat that I have, and she's a 60-foot long.
Holy smokes.
Sorry?
I said, holy smokes, that's a big boat, 60 feet.
Yeah, she's big. She's big, and she's heavy. Obviously, she's made of steel. With the cabin and the superstructure is timber, but the hull of the boat is steel. These Tjalks, they were agricultural barges, and I mean, they were commercial vessels, and they were used for as the gorgeous old Dutchman I bought her off told me, they were, and I can't use this word either, Bella, or you'll have to tick that box, but they were for. I said to him, what were they used for? And he said they were used for transporting feed in and something else out.
Okay.
And so, and actually the skipper's quarters at the time were tiny, but so that's why they're so big. So yeah, she's 60 foot long. She weighs about 40 tons. And she has, as they all did, a tipping mast. So you've got a mast, a big wooden mast. I mean, I tell people, and it's true, it's like owning your own telegraph pole. It is very large and very heavy. And what allows you to tip it is there is what must be an unbelievably heavy block of lead at one end. So it pivots, and the block of lead on the bottom 10th of the mast tip into the hull, and up comes the mast. So you can, go under bridges and power lines and everything else. And then if you want to go to sea or sail it, you put the mast up.
And maybe just for the listeners who don't really know the Netherlands, this is a very flat country that is, a lot of it is under sea level, right? I think, and it's crisscrossed with these canals. And this is how they move goods and services. And they're very, very old. They've been around for a long time. And so anytime you drive your car in the Netherlands, you're not so far from one of these canals, and the canals have bridges over them. So these boats, and now they have, big, fairly big vessels that carry, any manner of goods, agricultural or metals or whatever. But in the olden times, right, these wooden and steel boats would crisscross the country and come down. We're not far from the Netherlands, come right by where I live right now here in Munster, with loads of agricultural goods. And but the food in Netherlands is a very big dairy farming country, and a lot of cows, and so it's used in and out, as you said, so delicately, which we appreciate. So if you imagine, like, these are the trucks for the Netherlands, the agricultural trucks, I think.
They absolutely were, and they are. These boats are still everywhere. My one she must be heading for 115 years old now, I think.
Wow.
But they are absolute. The lady who told me they were everywhere in Holland wasn't lying, and they go from. In length, they go from probably about 30 feet long to ones that must be nearly 100 feet long.
And are they self-propelled? Do they have an engine?
They do now. I think a lot of them would not have originally. Interestingly enough, my one has a London taxi engine in her. The black taxis in London. So she's got a marinized London taxi engine in her.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I bought her, as I said, from this absolutely lovely old Dutchman. He was a ship's pilot, actually, his whole life. That was his career. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago, because we stayed friends afterwards.
Nice.
He and his wife were absolutely lovely, and that was a nice part of the whole thing for me, because we became friends. And I remember the morning after I went out to pick her up, and he had it is exactly like you say, Mike. I mean, Holland is amazing. There's water everywhere you look. And he had her moored in a canal about 3 minutes walk from his house.
Cool.
And so when I went to pick her up, and we went to get on board, I just tapped the boat just to say hello.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw me do it, and he went round to the stern, and he leant over the back, and he did the same thing. And he said, I do that every time I get on the boat.
Oh, wow.
I think we were kind of friends from that. I think it mattered to him that he was selling the boat on to somebody who would treat it the same way,
Yeah, respect and
yeah.
And where's the Mark? Where's the boat now?
So we took her over the course of 5 or 6 years from Holland, down through Holland, through Belgium, through France to Paris. When I bought her initially, the plan was to sail her home to Ireland. You can get them across the channel, handy enough if you pick your day. They've got no keels, so they're flat bottomed. She only draws about 80 centimeters, whatever that is in feet, but not much. But you can get them across. They've got these things called leeboards instead of a keel, but you can get them across the channel. Okay, the Irish Sea would be more of a challenge, but so the plan was to bring her home so that my father and I could go sailing in her. because we actually bought her together. So that was the plan, was to bring her home, and so he and I could go sailing in her. And then unfortunately he died. The first weekend I was due to go out and pick the boat up, he died. So that changed the plan. So when we got to Paris, we turned left. So I started joking that when we got to Paris, we might turn left instead of right, and that's exactly what we ended up doing. So we sailed her a good bit across Holland, like sailed her properly, because there are fairly large inland seas there. But then once you sort of get off that, you're then into canals and power lines and bridges and stuff. So just plottering along. And we're now down in the Canal du Midi after it only took about 7 years to get there. And one of the advantages of being in the Canal du Midi is I'm about a day's travel from the Med. So we can take her out sailing on the Med, which we've done a good few times.
Beautiful.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, that sounds great. And so you said this was a barge. So did they convert sort of the area where they keep all the feed into sort of like living quarters and stuff?
Yeah. So I don't know at what stage the cabin and the superstructure would have been added. You can actually see in behind where the engine is, you can see where the skipper used to live, which was very, very small. And then all the rest would have been just hold originally. Yeah. So now she can sleep three couples very comfortably. And there's a decent sized living area and a beautiful timber cabin. I mean, when Juka, who was the guy I bought her off, when we were talking, because we sailed her together a few times before I headed off home, and he said to me, if you could take €1 off everyone who stopped and took a photograph, you wouldn't have to pay for maintenance, and that was pretty much true.
Wow, sounds wonderful.
Now, Mark, did you add is there modern electronics on this at all, or is it pretty much all sailing old school?
Very old school. I guess if I get time, no, I don't need sailing electronics on her really, because any of the sailing we've done has either been on inland seas or coastal. Mm-hmm. So not, and you see, with the boat being out in France and I still work, and as you can imagine, particularly with all that timber, there's quite a bit of maintenance, and the telegraph pole needs maintenance done on it and stuff. So that's where my focus tends to be. And I mean, I wouldn't want to change any fundamentals about her. She's gaff rigged, by the way, so she's a real old traditional looking boat. And so I wouldn't want to change too much about her. And a lot of these big long boats now, they have bow thrusters on them. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't. So and she's heavy. She's heavy to steer. So interestingly, she's lighter to steer under sail than under engine, than under power. But either way, she's quite heavy to steer. And coming alongside and going in and out of marinas and stuff can, particularly if there's any sort of wind blowing, can be very, very challenging. Yeah. The very first trip we did, I took a swimming ladder off the end of a jetty, which was a bit embarrassing. Yeah.
Well, Mark, there are benefits to having the hull made out of steel and not
huge. Huge, and particularly now that she's on the Canal du Midi, it's heavily touristed, so you get a lot of these what I call plastic palaces heading towards you. And you know, and some of them on the wrong side of the waterway and stuff. And I tend to just look at them and go, well, that's your problem.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Nice. So yeah, lots of maintenance. I was going to ask you about that. And yeah, just sailing one of these things. It's a historical relic, right? In the sense of you're doing it all the old way. So how can you sail it with two people, or does it take? What's kind of the cruise situation?
You can, and I have with Ian, who would be pretty much my best mate. And he has, which you may want to come on to. He has he's a collection of boats as well, but he has a beautiful old dinghy called a water wag that he sails, and I would crew that with him. And he and I have sailed her just double-handed, the two of us, and we've sailed her out in the Med. But it's, being honest, it's a bit marginal, and I don't know if you guys know, but the weather out in the Med changes like that. And a couple of years ago, we got hit by a thunderstorm, just the two of us, and we had to pull all the canvas down. And there's a lot of canvas, and we had to just pull it all down. And so he got the unpleasant job of doing that, while I kept her going in a more or less straight line. But I wouldn't have wanted anything to go wrong, and I wouldn't do it with somebody I didn't completely trust.
Yeah.
You ideally, you'd want a crew of 3 all of whom really knew what they were doing at a minimum. They race these things, and actually,
no way, you're kidding me.
Oh yeah, it's worth going on to YouTube, and actually they've a version of these chouts called Skutche, Skutche, I think, or Skutse. I think the reason I'm spelling it is it's worth looking on YouTube, because they're racing these massive, big, heavy steel undersail, obviously, racing these massive, big, heavy steel boats, and they collide.
Wow.
And they capsize.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's actually amazing to watch this. And when they do that, they have a crew on board, I would say, of at least 12, something like that.
Okay. You'd have to, yeah.
Yeah. They've one guy, when they're racing them, whose job is to act as depth sounder. He's there just he's there with a big pole,
just stick, yeah,
with a stick, just like this, yeah, up and down, yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah, so two, yes, but probably not a good idea, really.
Wow, I love it. So I think we've been going for about 30 minutes. So my sense is, Bela, let's wrap this up, and then let's start again with episode 2 of this conversation. What do you think?
That sounds good.
All right, we had a good stopping point. So Mark, thanks. And we're going to come back next week, our next episode, with part 2 of your adventures. Okay.
Good to talk to you.
Hey, Mike, cool interview. Mark was really a great guest. So, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I found it really interesting. I mean, not only his boat, I found his backstory really interesting on sort of, how he got into sailing and stuff. So what were the key things that really stuck with you?
Well, I think the first thing is that, we've talked a lot about the sailing community in the US and how it's really a place where you can meet people, and people are open and kind and helpful almost all the time, right? With very few exceptions. Okay, so the rule holds for Ireland, I think, right? That, this was somebody that I just casually mentioned something to do, and he shared with me all kinds of stuff, and he made me all kinds of nice offers, if I'm ever around, blah, 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 right? And told me his story and was generous, and they even bought, I think, usually everybody's supposed to cover a round at the pub of pints, right? I think they covered more than his share with me, but I'll owe him for the next time. But just a wonderfully funny, nice man. And if you think, American stereotypes about Irish people, right? It's just a fantastic culture. And what an interesting guy. And the historical trends of his dad and the war was just amazing to kind of learn all of these connections. And the world, it really is small. And even though there's a big, giant ocean between Dublin, Ireland, and Rhode Island, USA, right? That I think that there's just some shared characteristics there that span the globe with people who sail. So that was just kind of a neat thing for me to learn, it was
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It was my hypothesis, and this is only a sample size of 1, but so far the hypothesis is being supported, right? We'll see. We'll keep looking, but
one of the things that really stuck with me was how, and I think you've been living now in Europe for a number of years, but culturally, people seem to repurpose things in Europe. They don't throw them out, right? In the United States, we're in this real disposable type of thing, and it kind of goes with boats as well. You go to boat yards here or marinas, and there's all these old boats in the back of the marina that have been sitting there for 30 years because somebody died or somebody forgot about it or whatever, and the marina can't get rid of it because our laws don't make it easy for them to like sell it to somebody else, right? And so they just sit there and they decay, and who knows what happens to them. But I was really impressed with sort of the culture of taking old things and sort of, refurbishing them, keeping them alive, and keeping them useful, and sometimes repurposing them. I mean, his whole boat used to be like a barge for carrying stuff.
Commercial,
and,
right?
Yeah. It's like, I've never heard that before, right? I just think that was really cool.
It's awesome. And you don't have to travel too far from where I live. I live near some canals, and you can go into the Netherlands, where he bought that boat, and you can see these same old but refurbished beautifully and repurposed. And I think there's a couple of drivers for that. And, again, I don't want to be, I've only lived here full time for 7 and 8 years and part time another 8 years before that. So I don't want to frame myself as a European expert, and I don't want to stereotype, because even within countries is really different here culturally. But I think it's pretty consistent to say, look, this is a very densely populated compared to the US, right? The distances are smaller. There's lots more people per square kilometer or square mile. We don't have as many natural resources as there are in the US, right? In terms of wood. I mean, I think, it's getting less and less in the US, but we typically haven't had this bounty that in the US's 300 years, right? Or America, right? That, okay, you can take it and there'll be enough. And this mentality of things that are large and things that you throw away. I mean, yeah, I get it. There are parts of the US that you don't see it in, but where I lived in the US, 4 places that I lived, it was the houses are bigger and bigger. The cars are bigger and bigger. The grocery carts are bigger. The sizes of the packages are bigger. Your refrigerator is bigger. Everything is bigger. And here, the buildings are made of stone and concrete. There's no really wood frame construction in most parts of Europe. Most parts of Europe are very energy efficient because electricity is more, oil is more, gasoline is more, everything is more efficient. And then the other thing is, in World War II, everything was destroyed. And so we have this real deep appreciation for things that are old because it didn't get destroyed in the war.
Right. Right.
So I think between the density, 1, 2, the kind of lack of raw materials here, and 3, the fact that there was really a crushing war here 1 generation ago still, it's still fresh in many people's minds. This has made us more resource careful. This has made us size constrained. This has made us more willing to recycle and reuse without big government programs, right? That this is just in our culture, and it's probably going to change, just like all culture changes. But right now, the people, young and old, they do tend to try to make things last longer and reuse and repurpose things, from building materials to cars to boats to you name it, clothes, right? We don't have closets in Germany. It's funny when I tell people this, there are no closets. You get a cabinet. It's called a Schrank in German. Right? I mean, a few houses I've seen have closets, but most apartments, they don't have closets, or maybe 1 closet. So you have fewer clothes because you have fewer places to put them. You don't have an attic. You don't have a garage. You don't have I have a little basement storage room, right? But I don't have as much room as I did in the US when I had a full basement, an attic, 2 spare bedrooms. This was normal, right? And in Germany, at least for the 50% or more of people that live in apartments and rent, right? They don't have a lot of space. And you don't see all the storage. In the US, you can't drive down a highway without seeing self-storage, right? This is, they have it here, but it's very uncommon, right? So even
our houses are not big enough.
Right. When you fill up your big house in the US, then you get a storage space and you put the rest of it there. And we just don't have that. So it's a different consumer mentality. And again, there are some differences within Europe. So I really don't, but generally I see these differences. So yes, Bela, I totally see this, and there's lots of people like Mark running around, and there are lots of people that do that in the US too that I know, but they're outnumbered by the people who have a much more throwaway consumer mindset. And the culture, it's not the people's fault. It's cultural influences, right? For sure. And it's the media, and it's corporations that kind of are selling bigger vehicles, because bigger vehicles are higher margin, right? Typically, and bigger houses are higher margins, right? So there's a business incentive to get bigger and bigger when you have the room, right? And we don't have the room here. Like I can show, I won't show, but the streets are narrower. There's less parking spaces, right? You need to have a small car here. Otherwise, you're not going to get a parking spot.
Right.
I don't even use my car. My bike's outside, right? When I go to the grocery store, like, this is a true story, right? My mother-in-law came to visit. I love her. And she's like, there's no express line, because every line is an express line, because in our little area here, nobody drives to the grocery store. They go three times a week. They just have what they can carry in their two hands or in their backpack on their bike, right? And they go multiple times. So nobody's got these big, giant, overflowing Costco size shopping carts. There are a few stores like that. But at least in the cities, right? A lot of the grocery stores are just 2 bags and that's it. So every line is an express line. You don't need it. It's funny. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. I went off on a ramble, but it was a great question and I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really have a respect and appreciation for kind of taking things that are old and fixing them up and repurposing them and continuing to use them. I just think that's a great trait for a culture and a society to have. And I think in many ways we're losing that here in the United States. And it was great to see that it over in Europe and other parts of the world, it extends into the sailing community and the marine community and the boating community, right?
For sure. For sure. And another interesting thing to think about with this, and that I learned from Mark, or I became aware of it. And while I was there, I walked around Dunleary, the port that he was talking about. It's a bedroom community of Dublin, right? It's part of Dublin, but it's where the ferries used to come in, and there's a big marina there. And but they've been sailing out of that port for like 1,000 years, or 800 years kind of thing. And so in the US, I know people who are fishermen and fisher people and people who are scientists who study them. And I get it that their families have been fishing for 200 years, right? But these communities have been around for 800 years, right? For a long time with boats, right? Commercial boats and people using boats to get around. It's this really cool, rich history that's there in the US, but it's 4 times as great in parts of Europe, which is really kind of amazing to think about it. From that standpoint. And that's why it's part of respecting the boats and respecting the importance of boating as part of the community is super strong. Here on the north coast of Germany, where there's boats along the canals in Germany, in the Netherlands, that I've traveled through pretty extensively, in France, and in the UK and in Ireland, it's all there. The UK and Ireland, Ireland's an island. And the UK is an island, and when you live on an island, sailing and boating is super important, right?
Yes. Yep.
And the US, I get it. The US is kind of a big island, but it's kind of not, right? It's kind of like it's a big country.
It's self-contained, right? Yeah. It's a big island, but it's self-contained because it has all the resources that it needed, particularly in the early days. We didn't need to import a lot of stuff except things like tea.
Mm-hmm. Right, which created all kinds of interesting issues, right? But yeah, and when you're Ireland, right, and everything is going in and out by ship, everything, right?
Right.
Like there's no train tracks, right, to get to the mainland, right?
That's right.
Or to the UK even, right? So it's all going by ship. And shipping is the lifeblood, right? So, and boating is part of shipping, right? The way I see it. So it really is a different perspective when you grow up on an island. Right. I think no matter what island that is, right. Hawaii or some of the islands off the coast of the US. But in Europe here, we have the UK and we have Ireland, which I think readers are sharp enough to know are 2 different countries, but in the same neighborhood. And that part of the world is beautiful. And I can't encourage people enough to go visit and to get on a boat themselves and see the coast. The coast of Ireland by boat is amazing. Right, the coast of the UK by boat is amazing. It's a nice way to see the country and to learn about the history, and it's just something that I can't recommend enough.
Yeah, So what do you say, Mike? Time to wrap this one up?
Absolutely. And listeners, stay tuned for part 2 of my conversation with Mark. And I hope that my interview style, I know, is not as good as Bela, so I hope it wasn't too annoying, but it sure was a great conversation. I'm really appreciative that you listened, and I hope it added something interesting and insightful to your day.
Yeah, agreed, Mike. So thank you for joining us for another episode. We hope you found the conversation interesting and thought-provoking. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, hit the like button on your app or whatever it is that you're using. And it really does help other people find us. It helps us turn up a little higher in the search engines. We don't do this for money at all, right? But it's nice when people find us and listen to us and send us emails. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest on the show, like Mark, right? Let us know, and we'll be happy to get in touch with them and try to get them on. That's it for today's episode. We hope to see you next time. Signing off from Münster, Germany. See you next time.
And signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.